Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast. And we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you sign up, you do get a weekly bonus episode of everything else I'm watching that week. People frequently ask me my thoughts on movies, shows, and other stuff besides just the movies we cover every week. That's all on the Patreon. And I want to take a quick moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Whitman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and rate this show. It does help new listeners find us. I have a new guest with me on the show today. I have Tom with the Hops and Box Office Flops podcast. Say hi, Tom.
Hello, thank you for having me.
That almost sounded like a tongue twister for me.
Yeah, it's a lot of words.
Tom, since this is your first time on the show, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us about your podcast and about your experience with movies.
Okay, yeah. So Hops and Box Office Flops is a movie podcast as well. We generally pair a underperforming or bad movie with a craft beer, and then we discuss that movie. Oftentimes, we have a lot of fun at the movie's expense. Sometimes we do movies we really love, but we do generally cover bad movies and better beers.
Oh, that sounds fun. I love craft beer, so it sounds right up my alley.
Yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
it's a good time.
Awesome. Well, Tom, my guest always picks the movie. Sometimes people say, "Have you covered this movie?" or "When are you going to cover this movie?" And that answer is when someone picks it. So, Tom, what movie did you choose to talk about today?
So I picked the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Predator.
I cannot believe no one's picked this yet. Like
I
when
was
you
actually
said that, I
shocked.
was like,
Yeah.
"Yes."
When I said Commando or Predator, I was like, oh, somebody definitely picked Predator. But then you're like, oh no. I was like, oh sweet. Yeah, let's talk about Predator because it's a classic that almost could have never been because of all
Oh.
that went on behind the scenes. So it's sort of a miracle that this wound up as awesome as it did and that it created one of the more enduring creatures in cinema. So
100%. Well, before we go too much further, I will tell guests that if you have not seen this movie before, and by the way, right now you can watch it for free. I think I saw it on Tubi. It was either Tubi or Hulu. No, I think it was Hulu. But anyway, you can watch it and please do, and then come back and listen to our discussion because we won't hold back. We will be filled with spoilers. So let me read the summary of the movie real quick and then we'll dive in. Dutch, a soldier of fortune, is hired by the U.S. government to secretly rescue a group of politicians trapped in Guatemala. But when Dutch and his team, which includes weapons expert Blaine and CIA agent George, land in Central America, there is something gravely wrong. After finding a string of dead bodies, the crew discovers they are being hunted by a brutal creature with superhuman strength and the ability to disappear into its surroundings.
I mean, that sort of gets it.
Yeah, it's like a vague summary. We'll dive in deeper, but um Tom, what is your experience with this movie? When did you first see it? I know it came out in 1987, so
Yeah, so I'm a child of the '80s. I was a bit too young to see this in theaters, far too young. But growing up in the '80s and the early '90s, movies like this were in syndication constantly,
yes.
and I would watch everything Arnold with my dad. It was like a real bonding thing. He took me to see T2 when it came out in 91, but I had seen Terminator and Predator and a lot of the more popular films that were syndicated because they were just on.
Mhm.
I didn't necessarily know that he called the Predator an ugly mother effer until probably high school, but I've always these were sort of like my superheroes. Arnold in particular was this action star who I was just a fanatic of, and in those times there were, I mean, we had Batman in '89, that was a really big deal, but if you were a superhero fan, the action stars were your superheroes.
That's such a good way to put it. Wow. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I am also a child of the '80s, and I was also too young when this came out. But I, like you, have the experience of seeing it on TV over and over. My uncle was like a huge fan for some random reason. It was like this movie, Jaws, and like he always liked creature movies. So he liked this one, Jaws, and he liked it was a little later, but Lake Placid. And I just
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
like watching those like over and over and over. Lake Placid, like I said, came later, but um with Predator, I just have so many memories of watching it with my uncle and my dad in the living room, just, watching it so many times. And so I can't even remember when I first saw it, but I just remember, like you, I was a huge fan of Arnold. I mean, everybody was. He's like, I guess, like The Rock today.
He was larger than life, and he had that personality, and a lot like The Rock too. Like The Rock is his own, like he lives in his own like atmosphere almost. Like
Yeah, he's like his own IP. Like, I don't know, he's
yeah,
just yeah. But so usually at this part of the podcast, we share some quick facts, and I've got a couple of them. It sounds like you've got some juicy ones. So,
yeah, I've seen this movie probably like 150 times,
oh my gosh, very cool. Okay, so then
but
you probably have way better ones than I do. But
there is, it had its 30th anniversary in 2017,
yeah, that's
and
true. Gosh,
all of a
that makes
sudden,
me
like,
feel
the
old.
oral history came out, and they re-released the, If It Bleeds documentary, which is like a 30-minute, like, behind the scenes that they shot mostly while they were filming the movie, and then I think at the 15-year anniversary, they re-recorded some interviews with Bill Duke and Carl Weathers and some other guys, but, yeah, there was a ton of great stuff in those.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've got 3 here, and it's no secret, guys. I mean, I get these from IMDb, and I just kinda comb through them and pick my favorites, but here's a couple that I really liked. Carl Weathers joked in an interview that Arnold Schwarzenegger got him addicted to cigar smoking during filming. Arnold is famous for smoking cigars, but he offered one to Weathers, who initially declined because he's a non-smoker from his pro football days, but, eventually gave in. Once he tried it, Arnold gave him a box of cigars.
I did see that one, yeah.
Yeah. Another one I had was at the Predator costume weighed. This one, anytime there's like costume stuff, I like to cosplay, so I always like these kind of facts. But the Predator costume weighed over 200 pounds, and even though 7'2" Kevin Peter Hall was a large, man, he had to be connected to a bungee rig in order for him to like believably.
Yeah, essentially he was like blind in that suit too. So a lot of these scenes were at the end where you only really get 8 minutes of Predator
Right.
Sans suit. He, was like being led because he had no idea where Arnold was. He hit him a couple times, I believe. Fortunately for him, you do get to see him as the helicopter pilot, one of the helicopter pilots at the end of the movie.
Oh.
And then sadly, he died like right after Predator 2 came out. He
Oh
died
my
of pneumonia
gosh.
at 35.
That is so young. Oh my gosh, what a terrible way to go.
Yeah.
Um, the predator's blood, a goopy substance with the color of Mountain Dew, was made on set using liquid from glow sticks and KY jelly.
Yep.
It's always funny when you read behind the scenes of stuff. But I saw the other day a TikToker that was like a little younger than me was talking about how like goopy the '90s were, and I'm like the goopiness of the '90s has nothing on the '80s.
Yeah, and that's sort of the glory of practical effect,
Yeah.
is the stuff you find out about how they made it, or like when they were doing the T-1000 when he's frozen and it's like Christmas tree spray. It's like, well, that can't be healthy.
Yeah, it's like now it's like, I don't know. I feel like there'd be some rules about that. Some tests done on skin first or something. But yeah, so yeah, I those are my two favorite facts really. Those last two. That 200 pounds, my gosh, that is
Yeah,
cumbersome.
it's and the suit, was designed by Stan Winston, who basically was brought on in an emergency because the original suit, which you can see in the If It Bleeds documentary, or just look up Predator original suit, and there's gifs of it online.
Oh.
Uh, they shot like 50% of the movie. They finally get this suit, and the studio had gone cheap because they were trying to make this movie basically within a reasonable budget. And they got the suit, and it looks terrible. I guess the closest description I could give it is if it looked like the art. It looks a little bit like the Arbiter from Halo 2, but not nearly as cool. And Van Damme was in the suit, so the alien was also drastically smaller. And
Wow.
so they did a couple of scenes with it, and they're like, "This is not going to work." They had to shut down production. Arnold says, "Hey, I worked with Stan Winston on Terminator. I bet you we can get him to do it." So they call him up. He's on a plane with James Cameron. He's drawn up designs because he'd seen. I guess he takes this initial meeting with the producer Joel Silver, and there was some Rastafarian warrior on his wall. So he's like, "Oh, that's cool." And James Cameron's going, I've never seen a creature with like mandibles. And he's like, "Oh, James, that's a great idea." So then he draws that up, and that's how we get this
Wow.
design. And had they said, "Hey, we're not shutting this down," or you got to work with what you have, this movie is not what it is because that original design was so goofy. It's not intimidating looking at all. And it is funny though that Van Damme was in it, and I guess there's a myriad of reasons. Maybe he got fired from this film. Apparently, he was whining a lot. He was passing out a lot because it was so hot in the suit. He wanted to do too many jump kicks, and they're like, "This isn't what the Predator would do." Virtually everybody has a different account of why Van Damme was fired from this movie, but
Well, yeah.
and so they wind up shutting down production for a few weeks, and the studio doesn't know what they have because essentially it's just a bunch of guys in a jungle, right?
Yeah. Yeah, to
And
me, this
so
movie is like Rambo with an alien, is like how
yeah,
I yeah, think of it.
so they rewrite that Palapa scene, right? That siege of the gorilla compound to be
Mhm.
this huge action scene. Originally, it
Wow.
wasn't that crazy, and they're like, if you can shoot this in 8 days, we'll send it to the studio. They did it. They saw it, and they're like, "Oh, okay, that's what we're paying for. Cool." Because they were ready to shut this thing down
Wow.
because what they had was just a bunch of muscular men walking through the jungle. And they're like, "Well, what's going on? Like, why is this intriguing?" They don't have any creature on screen, so they had nothing to show them.
Yeah, I mean, and your point earlier about, like, the creature really only being at the end for a few minutes, I feel like is the hallmark of a good creature film. Like, you don't show them till the very end, but you have to that build up and the action sequences have to be compelling enough to where that's exciting when you finally get the creature at the end.
Yeah, this movie is literally the best parts of Alien and Aliens.
Yeah, no,
You've
it's so
got
true.
the action, but you've also got the tense atmosphere and the one creature that they're learning about as they go.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. I was, like, paying attention to the time. I mean, you really don't even know that there's a creature till over an hour into the film, right? Because, like, for a long part of the film, it's a lot of build up getting to know the characters, going on the mission, and then things start to go sideways, and it takes a while to get there.
You know something is watching them, but until they leave that village, you get like the infrared vision. But until he picks up that dead scorpion, you don't know what's watching them.
Right.
And I think that's sort of the brilliance of this movie is the way it teases this thing out so well, and the glowing eyes, and you see it like if you look very closely in certain scenes, you can see the distorted leaves of the jungle because he's standing there.
Mhm. Well, I wanted in this next piece to talk a little bit about, like, the director and the cast. This is directed by John McTiernan, which, you guys have heard we did an episode on Die Hard, so it's kinda like, no wonder we like this movie so much. This guy made Die Hard.
Literally, he's in the despite what came after Die Hard with a Vengeance, and you get ran afoul with the law, and made a couple crummy movies. He's in the action movie Hall of Fame. You
Oh,
you
for
don't do
sure.
Predator, Die Hard with a Vengeance, Last Action Hero, which I love and I know was not so beloved at the time, but is I think aged pretty well. This guy was the man.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, also The Hunt for the Red October.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, we can see why yeah, he definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. So, that's one point, and then we've talked about Arnold a little bit. What can we say? This guy was larger than life. He was in tons of films in the '80s and '90s. You got Carl Weathers as Dylan, who I feel like is an almost equally important character in this movie.
And he adds like a little gravitas. Like
Mhm,
he's Jesse the Body, not an actor. This was his first movie, really. Richard Chavez
mhm.
plays Pancho, not necessarily like a big time actor. Uh, Sonny Landham had been in things. Funny thing about him is studio would not insure him because he
Oh,
was
really?
very angry drunk.
Oh, dear.
And so they had to hire a bodyguard to follow him around, not to protect him, but to protect other people from him.
My gosh.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And Shane
Yeah.
Black.
Uh-huh, and he was I guess they really only hired him because they thought they're gonna have to punch up the script
Mhm.
because, he'd done Lethal Weapon and he was, like, a really hot commodity, and it turned out he's like, "I really didn't do a whole lot with the script," which is cool to know that these 2 guys who the Thomas brothers who had slipped this script under an executive like, the Fox studio door because nobody would read it, um, this is their baby, and they wrote the sequel too, so
Oh, wow. Tell me a little more about that. I'm kinda interested in hearing about that. Like, how did this movie come about? I know you said there's a pretty interesting backstory.
yeah, so they basically were joking around after seeing Rocky 4 and they're like, "Well, what's next? Is he going to fight, an alien?" And they're like, "Wait a minute." So they're on vacation, they decide to write this movie. They couldn't get anybody to read it. It was a spec script, nobody wanted a piece of it. They slide it under the studio's door one day and it made its way to the right hands and all of a sudden they're like, "Well, can we get Arnold?" "Yeah, we can get Arnold." And this thing gets rolling.
Wow.
And but, that's like sort of the miracle of getting a movie made. Like it's tough. You never know how many queries you're gonna have to send out to get somebody to read your script, and sometimes it just happens by accident, and that's another sort of miracle coincidence of this film.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, what are some of your favorite scenes from this movie?
I think from the jump when Alan Silvestri of Avengers fame, that main title hits with the
Mhm.
da 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 da, and you see the guys riding in on the helicopter. From that point on, this movie's gonna come at you hard,
Yes.
and it's Dylan, you son of a bitch, the biceps, and then
That's like the
it's
manliest
like,
movie ever.
oh yeah, and that was like apparently a theme of the set too. Was Arnold had a gym shipped out to Mexico in Puerto Vallarta where they shot this, and it was just like a bunch of dudes trying to prove who's the most manly, and that's what Arnold's catchphrase was: "We're the manly men," and like
Well, and he kinda
he,
slimmed down for this role, right? Like, I read
yeah,
that because
yeah,
I noticed, like, watching it again, I was like, "He looks so much younger to me," but I think it's because he's so much smaller than I'm used to
yes, he
seeing him.
lost 25 pounds because he wanted to look more like a commando. A guy that was in the special forces as opposed to bulkier.
Yeah, granted, he's still huge, but
Yeah.
smaller than we've seen him.
Yes, and he still won a bottle of champagne from Jesse Ventura after he convinced the wardrobe department to make his biceps smaller than they were. And then Jesse's like, "Well, how big are Arnold's biceps?" And they were bigger, and so he shows up and he goes, "Arnold, how big do you think your biceps are? I bet mine are bigger." And he said, "Well, let's bet a bottle of champagne." And it turns out his biceps were like 3 inches bigger than Jesse's.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, not surprising.
But, I mean, from the jump, "What's the matter, Dylan?" "CIA's got you pushing too many pencils." I'm, like, in from that point on. So that's that scene's incredible. Of course, the raid on the guerrilla village is incredible.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think from there, a lot of things happening. People are getting picked off one by one, but the realization, if it bleeds, we can kill it. And them going about making these traps to get the best of this thing, and they still don't know exactly what it is, right? Or Mac charging up the hill. It's all I don't. There's no fat in this movie.
Yeah,
Literally, actually,
it is
literally
pretty
and
lean.
figuratively. There's
Yeah, literally, everyone's buff, and also there's no fat in the script. Yeah, it's hard to pick just a favorite scene. Like I said before, I kind of like the slow sort of build up until things really get crazy in the jungle, and then, like you said, you kind of realize the heat vision thing is so iconic now. That seemed like such a cool thing to do with the creature, and has been used so many times since then. Just giving you sort of an air of mystery of like, okay, we know we're working with a creature that is, sophisticated, intelligent. We don't know much about it. We don't, like you said, see it till the end, but they have to kind of outsmart it, and that's where, you know, uh, Arnold's character really comes into play. I mean, he was brought in because he was the best of the best. He had to be deceived to bring him there, but once he's there, he's their best shot at beating it. There's like a little bit of a legend around this creature already, right?
Yeah,
I
whenever
like
it's
that.
like the hottest, that's when he comes. Like the hottest years are when he comes, and they find people skinned, which is how their sort of intro to Arnold's already like some or Dutch is like something's going on here. Like they find Jim Hopper's men skinned alive. He's like, this is not what gorillas do.
Yeah, it's
This is
like
not within the rules of engagement that they'd leave these guys hanging in a helicopter without their skin.
right, right. It's gory, brutal, like, and not something that would be done for sure. And yeah, I like that added mystique that like this predator has been here before, and that the locals are like aware of it, but it's kind of like a legend. Um, and she's desperately trying to get away the whole time because she's like, we cannot fight this thing. But lucky for her, she's got Dutch with her, and Dylan, and together, along with their team, they're able to kind of try to outsmart this thing.
I think from the initial killings, right? You lose Blaine, you lose Hawkins,
Yeah.
and that sets up a nice thing because like, well, where's Hawkins's body, right? Where did it go? The jungle took him. The jungle took him, and then uh, they have Blaine all zipped up, and then there's another sort of predators testing the strength of their defenses, and he steals Blaine's body. Like, where did this
Mm,
body go? And then of course you get the great effect of him going to work and cleaning skulls and you know uh, essentially assembling his trophies. But
yeah.
it's all it's just all so well done, like, and it keeps building and building and building, and then as soon as you get to this, like which the crescendo is essentially the rest of the team is done for. You get the great sequence of Dylan taking responsibility for getting them into this mess. I'm going to go with Mac, and he and Mac think they've got the upper hand. Next thing you know, Mac's dead. Dylan
Yeah.
finds him dead. He turns around and he gets his arm blown off with the shoulder cannon, and it's like they're just hearing screams through the jungle as they're trying to march desperately as far away as possible to get to this chopper.
Get to the chopper. The iconic line.
Apparently, Arnold's favorite line of all his many many lines,
Really?
yeah, of in his movie career is "Get to the chopper." So I would have thought it'd be "I'll be back" since that one's so, you know,
Yeah,
it's in everything. But
it really is. I'm flipping through some of the pictures here too. Um, yeah, well, do you want to, I guess we kind of led up to, do you want to talk about like the face off with the creature?
yeah, and I think because now here one on one is very aliens esque, with Ripley being the last person on the Nostromo, right? I got to
Mhm.
get out of here. Except Arnold has no escape. Arnold's is, I'm going to take this thing out, right? Ripley's trying to get into this hatch and go, and he's trying to figure out how to best this thing because he's finally come to the realization after he falls off that waterfall that he can't see me. if my body heat is masked.
Mhm.
If you go to Puerto Vallarta, by the way, the village is a tourist spot still, and you can take
Really?
donkey rides up to this waterfall. It's a
No
lot smaller
way.
than it looks on screen, but yeah, I stayed at a resort a few times in high school, and that was one of the like excursions you could do was go up there, and of course, as an Arnold fan, you got to go up there and check
So
it
you
out.
did that.
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah.
Had no idea.
And I think my favorite part about all this is he literally it flips the narrative of the movie on its head. Arnold is actually a much superior hunter to the Predator. The
Mhm.
Predator, and it's weird in a way, like he almost serves as like an analogy for uh, like gun culture,
Mhm.
and where you see the people like, oh, here's my AR-15, this is my hunting rifle. It's like, well, that's not a hunting rifle. Like, what sport is it to have something like that that is so like the animal stands no chance? And in this movie, like literally everyone he's hunting really don't stand a chance against him. So
That's a
what
good
is the
point, I never
sport of
thought
it?
about it that way. Yeah, like, he enjoys hunting and killing humans, but they're completely defenseless. Like,
They're
they
taken
can't see
totally
him.
unaware. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
invisible. He has this incredible technology.
Shoulder
He's
cannons.
obviously agile. He's climbing all over the place, and it's really not so much like, are you the ultimate predator? Because it
Yeah.
doesn't really appear that way. Like now, is he taking on some very capable people? Certainly in this movie. But that's what I think about. Like in Predator 2, he goes to LA and it's like, what is he doing here in LA? Is he gonna kill people going to look at like the map of the stars? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It's, like, almost like, I guess I don't know, is his goal to, like, cause so much mayhem that an opponent will rise that can meet him? Like, he kills all those people, they end up bringing Arnold Schwarzenegger to him. Is that his goal? Like, very weird, but I've never thought about it that way.
yeah, and it really didn't like hit me so much until I was watching it this time. And I was kind of like, oh, you know what? Like, is he really like, is he the ultimate predator?
Yeah, he's kinda shooting fish in a barrel, like,
Yeah.
yeah. I gotta say the most jarring thing to me rewatching this is his laugh. I think I forgot about that. That part seems so bizarre and out of left field to me, like, now.
Him, yeah, sort of imitating the sounds of what he hears.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
was like,
and there
"Oh,
is that
I don't
moment
remember that."
where he's in the woods and he had heard Billy laugh about one of those obscene jokes that, yes, and Shane Black did write those jokes, which
Yeah, I
is
was gonna say that those had to have been Shane
not,
Black.
not come as a
There's
surprise.
no
But
way.
and Billy hears like that weird sort of warbling version of his laugh. And he's
Oh,
like,
yeah. Okay, so they did
like,
set up that precedent. That's
yeah, like,
true.
hmm. But it does take. It's almost like when the T-1000 dies and it just starts molding back into all the things that it had it, it, imitated
Mhm.
throughout the movie, and it's like really weird. It's like, why this is your death mode? You're just gonna like do all these things?
It is jarring though, I guess, visually.
Yeah,
It's unnerving when he laughs, for sure. Like, I think it makes sense, and it's like it's a cool thing to add because it's creepy. Like, he's not human, and he's laughing, and it feels so intentional and so evil that you're like, "Well, what's gonna happen now?" Like, I did think it was,
it's
like, perfectly timed.
it's a taunt.
Mhm.
Like, oh, you think you've gotten the best of me, but you
Now I'm gonna
haven't.
explode. Yeah.
Yeah, which of course, I mean, the way this movie has permeated pop culture, right? That's a finishing move in Mortal Kombat 3. Like it,
True.
and then of course later the Predator is in Mortal Kombat, and so
And then later you have Aliens versus Predator.
I know, and I think as like a kid I was so into this movie and Aliens too for sure. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
when they started marketing toys to art for R-rated movies to kids, I had all those Alien toys.
Yes.
It
Yeah, they
was
were
like,
super popular. I actually
yeah,
just bought a friend another Aliens toy recently. My friend Kara that was on I think she was on that episode. Yeah, that you listened
yeah. It's almost
to.
like I wish they would have capitalized on those two properties at their peak
Mhm.
and had someone like Jim Cameron do it,
Yeah, 'cause it
because
does feel like they're of the same world in some ways.
Oh, certainly. There's stories like easily that could be told about. I know that later on in the comics, there was a whole lore to the Predators and their home planet and stuff. And obviously, the movie Predators tried it, um, which was one of the more interesting things I found out as I was going through these extras on the Predator collection I have on Vudu. Is that Robert Rodriguez wrote Predators for Arnold
Oh, I had no
in the mid
idea.
'90s, and he even met with him to pitch the idea, and Arnold, I guess, was like, "Well, it has to be back in the jungle," and he's like, "Don't worry, it is." But he ultimately passed, and that's like an ultimate what if for me because I think that the Predator movies suffered so much without him.
Mm,
They never had a guy as charismatic as him to take that movie over and really make it as awesome as it could be. Like I love Adrian Brody. He's not a Dutch to me. He's not a Dutch type.
not even
Um,
close, yeah.
Danny Glover, love Danny Glover, same deal. Like, there's a reason Danny Glover was like the old tired guy in Lethal Weapon. 'Cause- but and I really didn't like the Alien versus Predator movies. They just felt like sort of cash grabby.
Yeah, I never saw them. I just it wasn't my thing, and, even with the Alien franchise, I was more into, like, 1 and 2, and I guess if the other ones are on, I'll watch them, but really 1 and 2 were the ones I cared
It's
about.
it's tough because three. I saw three in theaters. That was one of the movies my dad took me to, and it was like at the time I thought it was good, but it does not hold up particularly well. And I guess the director's cut is better. But four is like such a fall from like grace quality wise that it's hard to believe it's like how do you bungle a property like this? I don't understand. This is like gold.
Yeah, with such incredible design work and, like, it's all the blueprints already done for you, like, how does it it's just hard, I mean, and, I do well, I don't wanna start talking too much about aliens, but I love Prometheus. We have an episode on that too. But yeah, I don't know. I would love to see. Are you interested in seeing Prey?
So it's actually funny when I proposed this is one of the films to you, and you chose this. I was excited because our next series we always do movies in series on Hops and Box Office Flops, and we're gonna do basically Hops and Hunting Ground flops, and we're
Ooh,
doing Predator 2 and Predators and The Predator, which I was so hyped for because Shane Black was coming back. He was going to write it, and it's a hot mess.
oh no,
Um, and then we're going to do Prey
yeah.
because it's new and it's exciting, and I am excited for it. Pending on, I was a little worried, like, is this going to be just the Predator, just massacring Native American people? Because it's like I don't really think we need to evoke that history. It's really sad and tragic. Um,
Yeah, that's a good
but
point.
they seem to be the protagonists, and they seem like they're going to be. But there's imperialists too. There's obviously people that are coming. In that second trailer, I was like, oh, okay, this looks a little bit better to me. Because
Yeah,
is it
I
really
noticed
for
that too.
sport when you're hunting people who are using bow and arrows, and you've got
Right.
again the technology?
Yeah, the only advantage they have is, or that humans have, I guess, when he fights them in that setting, is that they know the land better than he does,
Yeah,
depending on
and
if
I
it's his
guess
first time there.
yeah, depending on, where they go with it, and yes, there's gonna be wooded areas, but there's gonna be open fields and things of that nature too, but, Dan Trachtenberg, pretty trustworthy. I mean, 10 Cloverfield Lane was pretty good, so I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the only thing I noticed from the trailer is that the effects looked shaky to me, but I guess we'll see when we see the movie. But I'm
Yeah,
open
that,
to the concept. The concept is interesting, and I had forgotten until I rewatched this that the precedent is set already in this movie that he's been there before. So I do like that.
yeah. I think, they kinda that was one of the things the movies kinda lost the thread with was the Predator lore, and by the time you get to Alien versus Predator, it, like, just absolutely makes no sense, but you know, them hunting throughout history, I think, is engaging enough of a premise to go with it. But yeah, the CGI bear, yeah, not great.
Yeah, that's that. I guess that Hulu budget.
And I wonder what kind of money they are putting in because it seems like a lot of these Fox properties are just like, hey, we're gonna throw these on Hulu.
Yeah, it's like they're done very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I get that sense about some of these MCU shows too, though, where it's like, oh man, no, this is really flat looking.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a definite dip in quality in some of the properties for sure. But regardless, because I'm entertained by the concept, I would still watch it. It's kinda like with the Aliens movies too. I'm like, you know, have there been some that I really didn't like? For sure. Will I probably go see another one? Yes.
Yeah,
So,
like
it's like
I
I
love
just like the
Prometheus,
characters. Mhm.
and then I hated Covenant.
Covenant did not care for as much. Yeah, I think I don't know if you felt the same way. We had a really good discussion about it on Twitter a while back, but I think David's turn is what really ruined Covenant for me. I mean, along with some of the effects and other weird things about it, but like that really, I didn't really see the need to go that dark with him. It just felt out of character and too morose. I don't know.
It was yeah, it was weird. I think the
It's
effects
like
is what
Hannibal
bugged me the
Lecter-ish.
most.
It's like,
Yeah,
why are we doing that?
you know, you kind of recreate the end of Alien, but it's with CGI, and it just doesn't work then.
Yeah. There's something about practical effects to this day, especially with creature films, honestly. It's like I want to see something, you know?
I do. I want to think that thing is there with them. It really ups the ante, and there's a lot of that in this movie that is just so well done. Because even though when the predator crawls by him, and this is like prior to the final showdown, and you see the sort of distorted, you know, I forget how they made it, but the guy was in a red suit. And they did all this weird stuff. There is a guy there crawling past him. So
Mhm.
even though those are effects, there was some guy there,
Right, right.
and that
Yeah,
adds to like the tense nature of the scene.
and I think, if Arnold is in this movie and he's so big, like, it doesn't make sense like this other version with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Like, it's gotta be a big, tall dude because he's fighting Arnold.
You like have to see these deleted scenes with the other suit,
Ugh.
and it is so goofy looking. Like, you know, in this he's got the shoulder cannon. It's really cool. It looks around like it's almost like it's got its own. It's like sentient.
Mhm.
And in that he's got like this little thing he carries in his hand, and it throws out almost like the thing from Krull, like the
Crow,
glaive.
yes. Someone
It's
should pick that
bad.
movie. I would love to talk about that.
Krull's
Um,
amazing.
yes. Um, but yeah, it's like, I don't know, there's just like you said, actors behave and respond differently when something's with them, like, truly with them. Like, I love that, that's one of my favorite things that, Denis Villeneuve said. He loves to do he started off with really grounded movies, and he did, like, Blade Runner 2049 and Dune, but there was, like, a behind the scenes interview I saw when he did 2049 where he said, actors just behave differently when they're in a real setting, and that's why he tried so hard to, like, stay away from just using green screen and, like, the little blaster, the gun, the Blade Runner gun, that's so iconic. He made it heavy because he's like, if it's not heavy and looks like it can just be thrown around, like, actors act differently when they're holding something heavy versus something light, and they so, like, what you're saying makes sense, and, like, Arnold even pushing back and saying, let's make sure that this setting, if I come back, it's in the jungle, like, all those elements, like, work really well in this film, and when you try to take the predator, I think, out of that, it just doesn't work as well.
Like the fact that these guys all were training with real weapons, they trained with a like an ex Navy SEAL guy and learned all the hand signals and did all that stuff. That goes a long way, and then
Mhm.
having the alien there too. I mean, I know the guy who plays Poncho served in Vietnam, and so did Jesse the Body Ventura. But you believe these guys are like the best of the best, which I
Yeah.
know is a very action movie trope. Like I love Commando, and John Matrix is the best. But
Mhm.
this movie, like it really adds a layer to it that the best of the best are getting wiped out and they don't know what to do.
Mhm. Yeah, they're getting wiped out by a predator who loves having an advantage, I guess. Like you said, he doesn't like a complicated game.
Now he stacks the deck.
It's so cool too, like, we've come so far, like, in the fan world. Like, you see so many of these guys now, like, at every big convention, there's a bunch of people in Predator suits, and they always look so awesome. I think just I love to see that.
That is, I think, I'm very happy that the character has endured, even if the movies have not always been as good as I'd like them to be. It's just amazing, like how far that design has gone, and to think
Yeah.
like they were so close to it not being that, and this movie could be a disaster, and then all of a sudden, it's out of print and you can't find this thing. Like, but this movie's going to live on for a long, long time. It transcends the genre, and I think all the best movies in any genre are ones that you can point to and be like, oh yeah, like I'm not big into sci-fi, but that movie is awesome.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, like I said, my uncle was like a huge fan, but he wasn't like a big sci-fi fan necessarily. He just really liked the way the creature looked. And I mean, I think that character design is so important in films like this. I mean, it does separate, something iconic from something that kind of falls away. And I think there's a lot of like happy coincidences in the movie that like have talked about, during our discussion, getting Arnold and like Jean-Claude Van Damme not working out and like the rest of the cast, like without all those elements, it really needs all that to work. It's just such a successful movie because of it.
It goes to show, like, it was when you're a kid, you don't ever think about how difficult it is to make a movie.
Hmm.
But for them to throw together like that palapa scene where they're literally blowing up crow's nests and blowing up trucks and blowing up a helicopter in a matter of like days, that's incredibly impressive for
Hmm.
the stunt crew and the film crew to like put that scene together. And I know McTiernan was really ticked off about it after they first did it, because he's like, I'm not making a war movie. How many times do I have to tell you this isn't a war movie? But that sold the movie. So without it, it's like,
That's
what do you
interesting
have?
that he says I'm not making a war movie. Can you talk more about that? What?
I guess when he came onto this, it was he wanted, the impression was this movie was called Hunter, and it was before it evolved into Predator when they remade the suit, and it was supposed to be much more atmosphere and tension. And
Mm,
yes, you get to this ending point where they have this sort of face off. Um, I think in the original script, Billy was actually more of the lead. It was the Native American guy that was the head of the group. And then
mm.
when they signed Arnold on, obviously that changed because he is the star. But
Yeah, he's not a background character.
no, like this is far before the Expendables when you could shortchange Arnold.
Right.
But yeah, he didn't want people to think this was going to be a stereotypical silly action movie because there were so many of them, and Commando had come out 2 years before this, and it's like, are people going to look at this and think, if this is what we're selling, that this is just more of that?
Well,
He thought they had something special with this concept, and of course they did, but
they definitely do, but at the same time, this movie is so successful because it is an action movie, I think.
I don't, like, I look at it as, you could say it's a horror movie, even though I don't, I never found it particularly scary. I think there's something comforting about knowing Arnold is there to save the day.
Right, it's like,
Um,
we're not gonna lose Arnold here, whereas, like, an Alien, you don't get that.
you don't know,
You
right?
don't have that,
Like,
yeah.
especially because Ellen Ripley was so, genre breaking, and
Yeah,
that's what makes her such a great character. But it's certainly sci-fi. But would I call it a sci-fi movie? I look at this as an action movie.
yeah, same. And I think it works best that way. I think if you try to lean too hard into the sci-fi, you can point to flaws like you've said before that I mean he's really got the advantage here. So it's like it's more fun I think as an action movie because there's reasons why he's invisible. He's got this deck stacked against them, but they have to really come up with like these traps for him and like outsmart him, and that makes it more fun. But I think if the movie took itself too seriously, I don't think it would work.
No, I think you have to have the quips, and I know "stick around" was something that Arnold improvised, but you have to have a little bit of that macho. These. you have to have a little fun in here. It can't be
Yeah.
too dour, and the whole time these guys are on a suicide mission. Like, you gotta give them their moment. So,
Yeah, you're kind of expecting all of them to die, but they you want them to, like, go out heroically, which I couldn't remember watching this again, it had been so long, I'm like, do any of them make it? Like, or does only Arnold walk out? And, you know, at the very end when, a few of them are still with us, I'm like, "Oh, okay." I guess that
y
was, like, the typical '80s, like, you don't kill everybody.
like, the girl is, like, really one of the she's, like, the smartest character. She's way ahead of the curve on these guys, and
Yeah,
she's
she
like,
knows
I
what
wanna
they're
get
up
out of
against.
here." Yeah.
She's like, we're not this is not a fair fight."
But one of my favorite parts is when she's like, "Okay, we're not getting out of here." She picks up the gun, Arnold kicks it out of her hand, and just, like, screams, "No," and just starts shooting into the tree, and then that's when he gets shot. "Get to the chopper!" And we get, here it is, one-on-one, finally, mano a mano, or mano a predator, best versus the best. Let's go.
Yeah. And that's what we're all waiting for. And again, it has to be an action movie because you don't I in my opinion, you don't make like a serious deep thinking sci-fi with Arnold as the main actor.
No.
Like you just can't. That just doesn't work. But
Arnold is here to blow things up.
yeah, and he does a wonderful job at that. And I just like their standoff. I like the way it ends with the explosions and like, him getting back in the chopper and I don't know. I really like the way that it wraps up.
I
Very
think
satisfying.
the helmet reveal is one of my favorite, creature reveal moments
Oh
because you've been
yeah.
waiting the entire movie for this.
There's
Uh,
something about the '80s too that had a lot of, like, crustacean-y, crab-like stuff
yeah,
going on, like, I mean, again, we have to talk about aliens because there's such a connection, but it reminds me a little bit of, like, the legs on the face huggers, like, I don't know, with the mandibles,
yeah, I
but
can
yeah,
see
it's a
that.
great reveal, it is.
And that, I mean, as much as they joke that what would Rocky fight next, like, Aliens and Alien were their 2 biggest inspirations, and
Right.
that's really clear. I mean, even if you didn't know that going in, like, you watch it and you're like, "Oh, yeah, this is just like as I said, the best of both of those. This is
Yeah.
great."
Yeah, it's really entertaining. And I think it holds up really well. Like I watched it again and I was like, this is a great movie. It's not like something sometimes you can kind of have rose-colored lenses on, especially when you watch something when you're younger, but I think this one's pretty enduring. I think, if you haven't seen it before, it's worth a watch.
There are very few effects in this film where you're gonna be like, "Oh, that looks terrible."
Yeah.
Uh, I think the first moment the jungle comes alive, little janky, but the practical effects hold up so well. There's Arnold movies I love, like Conan the Destroyer, right? Doesn't hold up. It's not a very good movie, but
Mhm.
because of my nostalgia, I love it. This You could put this in front of anybody. This will hold up.
Yeah,
Certainly the practical effects hold up far better than Terminator, the original, which was 3
I
years earlier,
agree.
but still.
I agree. I mean that again, we keep saying it, but the creature design is great. His suit is great, and it looks good. Um,
It looks fantastic. When his mandibles are twitching, when he roars for the first time,
yes.
it's incredible.
Yeah, so good, so good. Well, have we missed any of the iconic scenes you wanted to talk about or facts that you wanted to bring up?
I think we've talked, I mean, basically uh,
We
roundabout, we
covered it.
talked about basically all the great scenes of the movie, 'cause I love everything about this movie. I think it's as perfect a action movie as has been made.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a really good example of the, 80s, 90s aesthetic. It's a tight hour and 47 minutes too, so it's a pretty quick watch.
it is, yeah, and I was, like, getting a little tired last night, and I was like, "No, no, I know where we're at. No problem. I'm not giving up right before the showdown." Um, I mean, there's some funny stuff about Joel Silver. He's classically wacky guy. I don't know if you've heard the story. You've seen True Romance, I'm sure.
Yes, but it's been a
And
while.
Lee Donowitz, the Cocaine Party producer, is based on Joel Silver. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, and I guess because Tony Scott hated him so much, Yeah, he based that producer on him. But even in this movie, he would walk around in like a pith helmet,
Oh.
screaming like, "We're gonna take over Puerto Vallarta," and they started calling him El Generalissimo.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this brings me to my last couple of questions for you then. The first one being, I know we've talked about it this whole time, but if you had to elevator pitch this movie, like what is your pitch for this film to someone that's never seen it before?
Uh, do you like Commando? And inevitably they say yes because who doesn't like Commando? And do you like Alien? Then you will love this movie because
Yes.
there's not only one Arnold, there's like four other guys who are super jacked too, blowing things up.
By the way, I haven't seen Commando,
Oh my gosh!
so
Now,
you have to come back and cover that.
oh for sure, I would gladly talk about Commando because it's like one we can't really do on our podcast unless we want to break the rules because it made a lot of money. And shockingly, this was made for 18 million and made almost 100. And in the
Oh,
documentary,
really?
they were saying that they were in the red for a while on this, which I was shocked about. I was like,
It's just a
usually,
gamble. It's kind of a
yeah,
weird concept and yeah, interesting.
but Commando, I don't know how much you'll enjoy it if you have no nostalgia for it. But as an Arnold fan, I think you'll get a kick out of it.
Yeah, I feel like if Arnold's in it, it's watchable, is how I feel. So,
Yeah, Bill Duke's in it. He's a bad guy though, and that's great. And that's why he was in this movie because he and Arnold got
ah,
along so well. And he's a great part of
interesting.
Commando.
Okay. Well, and my other question for you is, well, I guess you already covered this, but so you would describe this movie as Commando plus Aliens, is that right?
Yeah, Commando and Alien
Okay. Okay.
and
I think that's a
Aliens.
pretty solid, even not knowing having not seen Commando, that rings true. Mine was Rambo with aliens.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess that inspired them too. That was Rambo: First Blood. The guy
Yeah.
hiding in the woods, basically survivalist. Except in that he's the underdog, so they kind of flip that on its head. But
Yeah, true, true, true. Well, Tom, this has been really great. Where can people find you?
so you can find me personally on Twitter at WriterTLK. Our show is available basically on any of your favorite podcatchers, and you could check our socials out at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Hops and Bo Flops.
Awesome.
So
Definitely have to check that out.
yeah, so check it out. I'll be finishing my Arnold leg sleeve tomorrow. So last session of my Arnold tattoo. I'm gonna post some pictures of that.
Oh, really? Very
Yeah,
cool. I need
that
to see pictures of this.
Terminator, Commando, Predator, Last Action Hero, and Conan are the
Wow. So
yeah.
you really are a huge fan.
Yeah, and now I'm getting very nostalgic about him just in general because the older he gets, and I don't think we're gonna get any more movies. And I enjoyed like his
Yeah.
sort of short comeback, but he's very civically active, and that's important too. But I miss Arnold. I miss
Yeah.
having movie stars like him. Like Tom Cruise is still around, and that's a movie star.
No, I agree. It does feel like it's of a different time. There's just so much content now, you
Yeah,
know?
it's very hard to keep up with too. And
Mhm.
like I know like there's the Chris Pratt experiment, but he's not. I don't really. He's fine. I think he's funny, but he's not like I don't think he's magnetic enough to be in as much stuff as he's been in
I
lately.
know, it does feel like he's in everything.
It's like
I
everywhere I look,
agree
it's
with
like,
you.
wait, why are you on my screen again? What is this?
Yeah, it's not quite the same. This was definitely an era for sure. And it's why I love, having these discussions and talking about these older films. So, Tom, thank you so much for picking this movie, and I hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, I thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I love talking Arnold. Let's definitely do Commando.
Mhm.
I would love to talk Commando. So
Sounds good.